As I went walking one cold dark day, I met old man down by the way. His head was bald and his beard was gray. His clothes were made of the cold hard clay. His clothes were made of the cold hard clay. I said, old man, what man are you? What country do you belong to? My name is Death, have you heard of me? All kings and princes bow down to me. All kings and princes bow down to me. My name is Death, can you not see me? Lords, dukes, and ladies bow down to me. And you are one of those branches three. And you, fair maid, must come on with me. And you, fair maid, must come on with me. As I went walking one cold dark day, I met an old man down by the way. His head was bald and his beard was gray. His clothes were made of the cold hard clay. His clothes were made of the cold hard clay. Back in the year 1888, two hunters who were from Julian, California, they were out hunting around Warner Springs. Warner Springs, we all know that's a spot up kind of between San Diego and Temecula, out east, out and toward the mountains and the desert. And these two hunters, their names were Edward Dean and Charles Cox. They were out there looking for some game hunting. They all of this is their home territory. It's their place to hunt. Now, they may live off in Julian, but they can hunt anywhere they please. That's their right as folks who own this land. So they were out hunting around there. Pretty soon they came across a little spring, a mountain spring out there, that hole full of nice clean water, good enough to drink. So they stopped to refresh themselves. Then they looked behind that hole and they saw that behind it, they saw there was a canyon, and they could see deep back into that canyon. It got more and more narrow, and more the walls were real tall, straight up and down. The further back you went, you could hardly see back there. It just got real dark back in there, just a lot of fallen trees and rocks and brush. And when they saw that canyon, they realized where they were. That's when they realized they were at Dead Man's Hole. Now, the reason this place is called Dead Man's Hole, it all goes back to earlier, years before the Dean and Cox came down here. Back in the 1850s, the Butterfield stagecoach, the line used to come right by this spring. And so they would always stop off at this cool, clean mountain spring. And the humans and the animals, the horses, they would all stop and drink that water. Well, back around 1858, there was a stagecoach driver, and he had stopped there. He had gotten off to refresh himself, and he got on his knees and he bent down to take a drink out of that water. And then he looked in the water. He screamed because he saw a dead man's face staring right back at him from the water. Decomposing body just floating in that water, staring up at him from right beneath the surface. Now, that wasn't the last time somebody found a dead body there. It turns out more and more people were showing up dead around that spring, around the forest, around there, right at the entrance to that canyon that goes back there. Now, these two hunters, Dean and Cox, they knew those stories. They knew about all the people who had disappeared around there too. For a while, nobody really paid much mind to it. I mean, in the gold rush days, people would disappear sometimes. Sometimes they would get in a fight with another miner. Sometimes they would just go off and start another family, leave their wife, leave their husband. It was a chaotic time. But more and more people from around Julian and from around the area in Warner Springs, people started disappearing more and more, and it just didn't make sense after a while. It was folks of all types. It could be white folks, it could be native people, it could be all types of folks who would disappear, and there was no clear motive for a person to do anything to them. Eventually, there was a man from San Francisco. He had come down to Julian, and he disappeared. They found him dead down by that spring, by that canyon, by Dead Man's Hole. His name was William Blair. He was a wealthy man, and he had some relatives up in San Francisco. They wanted to get to the bottom of this. They even came down from San Francisco to ask around to figure out what had happened to William Blair. They couldn't make any sense out of it. The strangest thing was William Blair, he was found dead by the entrance to that canyon. He was found strangled. He'd been strangled to death like so many of the other bodies found down by Dead Man's Hole. But he still had his fine gold watch on his wrist. And he still had a billfold full of hundreds of dollars in his pocket. Nobody had taken anything. They just strangled him and left him there. That was strange. Now, people kept showing up dead at Dead Man's Hole. And these two hunters, Dean and Cox, they knew those stories. They knew them well. So when they saw that canyon, they gave each other a look and they said, we should go explore in there. We should go see what's back there. They didn't know what could be back there. They didn't know if it was man or beast that was killing all these people. All they knew that they might have a chance to put a stop to it. All they knew is this place, this is our home. This is our home. We're not going to let anybody do this to the people who live in our home. So whatever's back there, man or beast, we should go back there and we should hunt it down. Well, they started hiking up into that canyon. They struggled to get into it. It was really rough, inhospitable country. They're hiking, crawling over boulders and fallen trees and rocks and brush. And about halfway in, once they get in, they see that there's barely any sunlight comes in there at all. The walls are just steep up and down. And they kind of stopped to catch their breath. And they heard this noise off in the brush. Some kind of big, heavy creature, something just crashing through the brush, making this scandalous noise. So Cox, he climbed up that canyon wall. He wanted to get a better look at what was that. He had his rifle shouldered up, and he wanted to see what was down there. And once he got up on the canyon wall, he looked, and he could see down, and he gasped. Whatever was down there, some kind of critter, some sort of huge creature. He'd never seen an animal like that. It looked like a bear from behind, but it wasn't a bear. And that thing, it was walking away at breakneck speed. It was amazing how quickly it could move, just jumping over those boulders. It was agile. It was swift. It had these long legs, longer than on anything he'd ever seen. Long legs, well over 6-7 feet tall. And it was all covered in long, blackish brown hair. And that thing was jumping over the stones, trying to get away from them. So Cox, he called out to Dean. And Dean pointed out, Dean looked at that creature too. So both of them, they fired their guns off into the air to distract the creature, get its attention, and maybe get it to stop. And that creature, it stopped and it turned around. And they both felt like their blood went cold. When it turned and looked at them, they could have sworn that its face looked almost human. Well, that creature kept on running away. It ran down to the end of that canyon, and it started climbing up the wall of the canyon. Up toward the top, they could see a fissure in the rocks, and it looked like that fissure went back into a dark cave of some kind. So Cox, he points his rifle at that creature, and he fires 2 shots, and he hit it. That creature gave out a terrible howl, and it came falling backwards down. The rocks fell down to the ground. Cox and Dean, they walked up to it. Both kept their rifles at ready. They walked up, they went up, found it. It was dead all right. They got up close enough. They kind of poked it with their boots, and they got close enough. They could see this thing all covered in this long hair, and its face, it did look almost human, but not quite. And the teeth, they were more like fangs, like a bear's fangs hanging out of its mouth. Its feet were bigger than any kind of feet they'd ever seen, all covered on top with that long black hair, and it stank terrible. And when they saw that it had been trying to get up to that cave, they decided to go investigate themselves. They thought, what if there are others up there? We should go take care of them. Think of how many people's lives we could save if we kill off, if there's any youngins up there. So they climbed up to that cave, taking real care. They don't know what could be in there. They got up, they walked into the dark entrance to that cave. There's still enough sunlight coming in, Their eyes adjusted to the light, and they've got their rifles at ready. But there was no living creature in there. So they walked further back into that cave. And back at the very back, they found piled up in one corner of the cave, there was a big pile of brush and straw and leaves. That must have been this creature's its bed, if you could call it that. And then in the other corner of the cave, they saw it stank. It's a pile of bones, all sorts of bones, animal bones, human bones, deer, other elk, all kinds of critters mixed in with the human bones. And as they were walking away from that pile of bones, and they looked and they saw on the ledge of the cave, there's a natural ledge running along the wall of the cave, and there, smiling back at them, are 8 human skulls lined up on that ledge, like trophies. That's when they realized this critter had lived in this cave, and it would come out to hunt. It would come walk down that canyon, walk down to Dead Man's Hole, to that watering hole, and just wait for whatever critter or human would come by to drink some water. And then he would sneak up on them from behind, wrap its huge hands around that person or critter's neck and strangle them dead, then drag them back to its cave to eat them. Now they just figured that the humans who'd been found there, something must have spooked the critter off before it could take them back and feast on them. Well, they looked at each other and then they sort of started thinking, they started putting the pieces together, and they realized that this thing, this is its home. It hunts here just like we hunt here. And if this thing lives here, this is its home, there could be others out there that also think this is its home, just like we think this land is our home. And Dean and Cox, they looked at each other. Dean said, "We should probably get out of this cave." Cox said, "I think that's a good idea." So they did. They went back to Julian and told everyone the story. Now, to this day, we don't know if there are any other creatures like that out there at Warner Springs, but if there are, just as we humans think that this land is our land, our hunting ground, well, they think of it as their hunting ground too, just like us. They need to feed. As I walked forth one cold, dark day, I met an old man down by the way. His head was bald and his beard was gray. His clothes were made of the cold, hard clay. His clothes were made of the cold, hard clay. The creature of Dead Man's Hole.